Hey everyone. One of the topics a lot of people have been talking about lately is J.D. Vance and whether or not he is the best choice to be the nominee for the presidency next time around. And Victor Davis Hansen was on his podcast recently, and he was talking about this issue. And I've got a few things to say about it. So let's first take a look at Victor Davis Hansen. Here we go.
This anti-Semitic Israel hard right stuff is not solved, then I think the Republicans they have to find a way of solving it without alienating people who have been misled and blaming them. But you have to be, when I say misled, I mean if anybody buys into the idea that the Jews are responsible for maladies, they're crazy. And, I think maybe part of it is they say, well, Jewish people are 75% Democrat. That's changing. And what you want to do is ensure that nobody on the right is anti-Semitic, because we know the left is. That's the whole essence of the pro-Palestinian radical Israel is a colonial settler, all that stuff that we see on campuses.
And Victor, we were just talking about the 2028 elections, or potential candidates, I should say. And I was wondering, you and everybody seems to be assuming that Vance would be the presidential candidate and Rubio the vice presidential, but it might make more sense to have Rubio as the presidential candidate. And so you've been suggesting that if Vance can overcome this anti-Semitism that is implicit in some of his relationships, I guess you would have to say, then that would be fine. Maybe Vance could hold it, but Rubio could hold it a lot better. He has a little bit more charisma, I think, than Vance does, and so it's going to be a quandary.
I don't know about that. But there was something that's just an ironclad reality. J.D. Vance is not going to be vice president for 4 years under Donald Trump and then turn around and say, I have 4 more years under Marco Rubio. It's just not going to happen. I'm sorry. He's going to run for president, and if he doesn't get the nomination, he's not going to be picked by Rubio. Rubio can be picked by Vance, and he can say, you can serve for 8 years like George H.W. Bush, and then you can come in. Rubio is still young enough, I think in his late 50s, that he could do that in his 60s. They're both very good. They're both very good with the media. They're both very good on the issues. As I said, the only problem that Vance has, I'll give you one example. So it was Holocaust Remembrance Day, and Vance talked, I thought, quite movingly about the tragedy of the Holocaust. But he didn't mention the Jewish people. And, there's 6 million Jews. There was about 1.5 million other people. But there's a tendency now in popular culture for people to latch on to the Holocaust, and they'll say, well, there was 27 million Russians killed. There was 20 million Chinese. Yes, but these were mostly in combat situations or collateral damage through bombing, etc. What was unique about the Holocaust was there was a systematic ideological effort to take citizens that were not combatants and pull them out of every different country, regardless if they were an ally or an enemy of the Third Reich, and then find an industrial way of killing them. Not shooting them initially, not gassing them in with the carbon monoxide. I'm talking about making death camps and using German engineering and expertise to make special types of crematoria and Zygon B, and etc. That was unique. And when you talk about the Holocaust, you have to mention that it was yes, there were people who were slaughtered who were civilians, maybe 8 million, but the majority of them were Jewish people who were selected because of their ethnic background and religion and traditional role in European society as being very successful, competent, good citizens. And that has to be the lesson of the Holocaust. Whereas now, when the Palestinians said there's a genocide, so we had our Holocaust, etc. And I think he erred by not saying that about the Jews. And So I like both of them. I have no, I'm not preferring one or the other at this point. I'm just saying that uh, the conventional wisdom was that Marco Rubio was not interested, and J.D. Vance was the heir apparent. But the rise of the Groyper, Nick Fuentes, the Tucker Carlson interview has shaken a lot of the, I would call them the more moderate people. I don't know how, the coalition that makes up the Trump constituency. And what I mean by that is they're going to have to deal with it. And J.D. Vance is going to have to find a way to reassure Jewish voters and people who are angry about the new anti-Semitism on the right that he abhors that, and then still find a way to appeal to this lost generation of white males that have been given the short end of the stick because of globalization and wokeness and DEI and the whole radical feminism. These people are rapists, toxic masculine, etc.
All right.
Okay, so I have a few thoughts about J.D. Vance, and in no particular order. First of all, I like the guy. I think he's great on policy. I like what he stands for. I think he's an excellent communicator. I was thrilled when President Trump chose him as a running mate. And I think that the Jewish community is extremely sensitive, maybe oversensitive when it comes to things like, oh, he didn't mention the Jews when he was talking about the Holocaust. And maybe they're right that it signals something deeper, but I don't care about all that. I think that there are two issues for me with J.D. Vance. One is, again, as much as I like the guy, his political career, it has not been going on very long. Okay, his resume before becoming vice president was simply that he served in the Marines. Excuse me. He served in the Marines. He went to Yale Law School. He worked for a little while as a lawyer, and then he wrote a best-selling book, a memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, and then he shortly after that, so he became a public intellectual, and then he ran for Senate in the state of Ohio, and he won. And barely into his first term, he was chosen by President Trump as his running mate. So he officially served 2 years of his term, but he was on the campaign trail for a lot of that. He barely has any political experience. And the reason that that's an issue for me, I mean, you could say President Trump didn't have political experience, but there's a very big difference. What makes President Trump is that he has these decades of negotiations and entrepreneurship, and that involves a lot of risk-taking and independent decision-making. And all of those aspects of his personality were honed over decades and decades. And that's what makes him who he is, where he'll sit and listen to all the experts, but then he'll make an independent decision. A great example is the move of the embassy to Jerusalem, that all the experts were saying it's going to cause all sorts of regional unrest, and it didn't. And he made an independent decision regardless of what the experts had to say. Someone with such a small amount of experience, with so little experience, who's also never managed people. He didn't build a business. J.D. Vance is exactly the type of profile. He's a great communicator, he's a great thinker, but he's exactly the type of profile to really rely on his advisors who have that experience. And that, I think, means that despite the fact that there's a commonality between Trump's ideas and Vance's ideas politically, as leaders, I expect Vance to be someone controlled by the advisors around him and really deferring to them. And that would mean a lot less of what President Trump brings to the table. That's one issue. Now, onto the issue of the association with Tucker Carlson. And I'm not passing judgment on this. I'm just giving you what I believe, politically speaking, is the lay of the land. Tucker Carlson is so toxic and has alienated so many clear-thinking and middle-of-the-road people, including the Jewish coalition. And there's a lot of people who came over to Trump because of Trump's personality and because of what he offered, who are turned off by everything going on there with Tucker and the other people in that camp. That I believe the following will happen if J.D. Vance is the candidate. Here's what I believe will happen. I believe that someone on the Democrat side, probably Gavin Newsom, will pivot towards rhetoric that is more pro-Jewish and pro-Israel. They will lean in, whoever the Democrat candidate will lean in on the attack on the association with Tucker Carlson. J.D. Vance, because of his principles and his relationship, will refuse to disavow Tucker Carlson. And they'll use this as a cudgel and it'll end up hurting that campaign. Now, let's remember also, in a campaign where there's high voter turnout, that favors the Republicans. The Republican side has a lot more people who are fair weather voters who don't vote in every election. That's what the Trump coalition was built on. It was built on getting a lot of people who had never voted before to jump on the bandwagon and vote. A lot of those people will stay home if it's J.D. Vance. And that's what I fear. And again, and part of it will be this association with some people who are unfavorable. J.D. Vance is a young guy. He's very young, and he has a very long political career ahead of him if he chooses a different path. But I think it's a dangerous situation for the Republicans. Again, I like J.D. Vance. Maybe I'm an outlier in my community, but I think I like J.D. Vance. I'm not sure he'd make a good president yet in his career for the reasons I outlined. And like I just said, I believe that by his principled stand to not cancel or not disavow Tucker, which he'll take, will end up being used as a weapon in the hands of the Democrats, who will pivot towards the Jews in Israel, and J.D. Vance will lose. That is my dark prediction if J.D. Vance is the candidate. We'll see how things play out, but that's my take on this situation. Keep watching. Thank you for subscribing, liking, sharing, all that stuff. The channel's growing, and hopefully it'll keep growing with your help. And please make sure to check out all the great content that we're putting up at Israel 365 News YouTube channel. God bless.